This is MSNBC. In the hours and days following the not guilty verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, the network spread misinformation about the facts of the trial and just straight up lied about Rittenhouse. So let's start with professional wrong person Jason Johnson, who was guest hosting on MSNBC's The Readout.
We begin The Readout tonight with yet another judicial gut punch. 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, a militiaman wannabe who crossed state lines and killed two human beings at a Black Lives Matter rally, was found not guilty on all 5 counts.
First, for Johnson to call it a Black Lives Matter rally is just priceless. I mean, at best, it was a mostly peaceful protest, right? Second, Rittenhouse was not a militiaman wannabe, and there is no evidence to suggest that he is. Even the Anti-Defamation League admits this. In February 2021, the ADL's Center on Extremism said the following: "There is to date no evidence that Rittenhouse was involved with the Kenosha Guard, which is a militia group, or showed up as a result of their call to action. Nor is there evidence of ties to other extremist groups, either militia groups or white supremacist groups." Rittenhouse's social media accounts provided no evidence of ties to extremism prior to the killings. Third, the whole "he crossed state lines" thing is not true either, because Rittenhouse was working as a lifeguard in Kenosha the day before the shooting and spent the night before in Kenosha at a friend's house.
The demonstrations at the heart of the trial were in response to the police shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times by a white Kenosha police officer and was paralyzed from the waist down.
Notice that he left out the reason that Jacob Blake was shot. It's because he had a knife in his hand, which he admitted to during an interview on Good Morning America.
You know, I realized I had dropped my knife. I had a little pocket knife. So I picked it up after I got off of him.
Oh my God, he shot him over a harmless pocket knife. Wrong. This is the actual knife that was on Blake's person, and here's the manufacturer's description. The karambit with quick draw Kydex sheath is a folding karambit designed in-house with one purpose: to serve the user in comfort and efficiency. Our patent-pending quick draw design allows the user to draw and attack/defend in a single motion. And according to witnesses, Blake turned towards the police officer with that pocket knife still in his hand. And that's why the Department of Justice announced that it would not pursue federal civil charges against the officer because, long story short, it was considered a good shooting. On a side note, here's the Reverend Al Sharpton recently talking to Jacob Blake's father.
Now, let me ask you this. You've been all over this country since Jacob was killed. You spoke at the big march on Washington fighting for others.
So unless Michael Strahan interviewed a Force ghost, I'm pretty sure that Jacob Blake is alive and well. Relatively speaking, that is.
This country was built on the idea that white men had a particular kind of freedom and a particular kind of citizenship that only they have. That gives, from the slave catchers on, the right to inflict violence in the name of protecting property. That's like the foundational creation of the United States.
Now, if you know anything about Joy Reid, her race-baiting take should be no surprise. But it's also very wrong, as Rittenhouse didn't inflict violence in the name of protecting property, nor did the case have anything to do with anyone's skin color.
But what I am concerned about is the precedent this sets for what people will believe that they can do under law when Black Lives Matter protests happen in the future, and that people may use this as an excuse to start going out of state and doing what this teenager did, believing that they'll get away with it, and in some cases, getting away with it.
Of course, she and the rest of MSNBC completely ignore the video evidence that shows Rittenhouse being chased by Joseph Rosenbaum. Earlier, Rosenbaum was threatening to kill people, including Kyle Rittenhouse. He was the catalyst of the entire situation, and he was shot when and only when he tried to grab Rittenhouse's gun.
The evidence suggests that Rittenhouse went to Kenosha spoiling for a fight.
No, it doesn't. The evidence shows that he was there already in Kenosha when he made the fateful decision to help prevent a used car lot from being burned to the ground and provide first aid to people.
That's why he brought that semi-assault gun, the bulletproof vest, and the full metal bullets.
Full metal bullets, guys. Clearly, this genius former federal prosecutor is trying to paint Full Metal Jacket ammunition as being the most dangerous of all ammo. As for the bulletproof vest, Rittenhouse wasn't even wearing it because he gave it to another person who was guarding the used car lot. So if he was spoiling for a fight, don't you think he would have kept it on his person? But liars like Paul Butler can't present the actual facts of the case because it would destroy their entire race-baiting narrative.
I think there's a real reason why you didn't see a lot of protests yesterday. It's because if you went into the street after that verdict, you could be shot dead in the street and there would be no consequence.
They've made him their new hero on the right for admittedly killing those people and getting away with it, which raises all sorts of questions about the safety of public protest in the future.
The only people that Rittenhouse shot at were people who were physically attacking him and or threatening him with a weapon, but instead of telling the truth, they would rather scaremonger. And it should be noted that in the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting incident, that the only person that didn't have an extensive violent criminal record was Kyle Rittenhouse himself. Let that sink in.
So they're going to have a fear of getting gunned down by a 17-year-old who doesn't even live there with an AR-15.
So if you own a gun, you're only allowed to use it in your own town. Got it.
An AR-15 illegally obtained and illegally held, and he had no business being there.
Wrong, honey. Rittenhouse was initially charged with being a minor in possession of a firearm, which is a misdemeanor. But long story short, there is an exception in Wisconsin law that allows 16 and 17-year-olds to carry certain rifles and shotguns, which is why the gun possession charge was dropped. In other words, the firearm was not illegally held. So Katie Fang, super lawyer, is either ignorant of the case in Wisconsin law or is a liar. You be the judge.
The first thing that occurred to me after this ruling is, oh, well, okay, now it's just open season. Like if I'm walking around and I'm a white nationalist, coward little kid with an AR-15, and I see somebody drive by with a Black Lives Matter bumper sticker and I feel threatened, I can open fire.
What?
If I go by a youth group standing outside the local Target and they're chanting Black Lives Matter and I feel threatened, I can open fire.
Do you see how sick and dishonest these people are? Again, the only people that Rittenhouse fired at were people who were attacking him.
Now we're being told that someone can cross state lines with a semi-automatic rifle and kill people and say it's self-defense, and they have this case to cite as saying that I'm like Rittenhouse.
Yes.
I'm disgusted at what I'm seeing. It's not just this trial, it's other trials. But this in particular, the fact that white supremacists roam the halls of Congress freely and celebrate this little murderous white supremacist, and the fact that he gets to walk the streets freely, it lets you know these people have access to instituting laws. They represent the legislative branch of this country. What are we to make of that?
Countdown to the defamation lawsuit. Because Rittenhouse was found not guilty of homicide. Nor is there any evidence whatsoever of Rittenhouse being a white supremacist. In fact, just the opposite.
I'm not a racist person. I support the BLM movement. I support peacefully demonstrating.
So Kyle Rittenhouse, a so-called white supremacist, also supports Black Lives Matter. Makes sense to me. What's your problem?
Let's remember, Rittenhouse is now being offered internships by members of Congress, like he's some hero.
The key to an internship is being a good person, a moral citizen. Apparently, you just have to go out and murder people who you disagree with.
And like Tiffany Cross, Jason Johnson is just begging to be involved in a lawsuit. Because again, saying that Rittenhouse murdered people when he was found not guilty of murder is arguably defamatory. Now, let's talk about lies about the trial itself, specifically about the presiding judge, Bruce Schroeder.
The judge was in the tank for the defendant from the jump. I mean, literally before the trial, he was making motions and making rulings in favor of Rittenhouse.
Oh, I see. The judge should only be allowed to make motions that favor the prosecution. but only in cases when it's a white defendant.
He continued that bias throughout the trial. That's without even getting into his MAGA ringtones.
Oh yes, the MAGA ringtones accusation. At least one point during the trial, the judge's phone rang, which revealed that his ringtone is God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood.
Court makes a finding that the actions that I had talked about.
So for those unfamiliar, the song is about being proud to be a freedom-loving American. So of course people like Ms. Stahl hate this song, because they fundamentally hate America. But you have to wonder what they'd be accusing the judge of if his ringtone was the real MAGA anthem.
But what did shock a lot of people is the behavior of just the judge. I want to play you a clip of just some of his greatest hits and get your thoughts on the other side as to what this does to our legal system when you see somebody behave like this in a trial that's so important.
So Johnson goes on to play 3 specific clips of Judge Schroeder during the trial that supposedly show bias. He doesn't provide context or explain these clips at all, but I will, individually. Here's the first clip.
The word victim is a loaded word.
Yes, in this specific case, it is a loaded word. Here's Judge Schroeder responding to media criticism on that matter.
How would you like to be put on trial for a crime? And the judge introduced the case to the jury by introducing you as the defendant and the person who is accusing you as the victim. And then throughout the trial, have all the references to the complaining witness as being the victim. Is it so difficult to just use the term complaining witness instead of prejudging what the jury is here to determine as to whether there's a victim and whether there was a crime committed?
And by the way, Judge Schroeder banning the term victim is standard practice in his courtroom. But Jason Johnson, who is not a lawyer, wanted the prosecution to be able to say the word victim because feelings.
I will tell you this. I'm going to think long and hard about live television of a trial again next time. I don't know. I've always been a firm believer in it because I think the people should be able to see what's going on. But when I see what's being done, it's really quite frightening.
So outlets like MSNBC were misrepresenting the facts of the trial during the trial. And so the judge was complaining about it in the middle of jury deliberations. It didn't actually have an effect on the outcome of the trial. In other words, when MSNBC played all of these clips misrepresenting what was going on during the trial, MSNBC proved the judge's point. Great job, idiots.
I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence. That's basic law. It's been basic law in this country for 40 years, 50 years. I have no idea why you would do something like that.
That clip was from a moment when Judge Schroeder admonished the prosecutor, Thomas Binger, for bringing up evidence in front of the jury that the judge previously ruled was off limits. Clearly he was pissed and could have easily called a mistrial with prejudice, but he didn't because he wasn't in the bag for the defense. Now in that clip, the judge was specifically commenting on something that happened 20 minutes earlier at the beginning of cross-examination.
Since August 25th, 2020, this is the first time that you have told your story.
Sustained.
Since August 25th, 2020, you've had the benefit of watching countless videos of your actions that night, correct?
I've seen certain videos, not all of them. I've seen the majority of them actually here during the trial.
You've also had the opportunity to listen to the testimony of all 30-some witnesses that have testified in this trial so far, correct?
Yes.
And after all of that, now you are telling us your side of the story, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to ask you folks to go in the library for just a second. Please don't talk about the case.
He's commenting on my client's right to remain silent.
No, Your Honor. I am making the point that after hearing everything in the case, now he's tailoring his story.
So for clarity, you know in movies and TV when the cops arrest someone and say, you have the right to remain silent, anything you say can be used against you in a court of law, blah, blah, blah. Well, Binger was suggesting in front of the jury that Kyle's silence implied guilt. So, of course the judge called him out on it.
The problem is, this is a grave constitutional violation for you to talk about the defendant's silence. And that is, and you're right. You're right on the borderline, and you may be over, but it better stop.
Understood.
So despite several instances of prosecutorial misconduct, including withholding evidence and hiding the identity of a witness, the judge did not declare a mistrial with prejudice because he wanted to at least see it through to a jury decision. And yet, people like Jason Johnson completely ignore what actually happened during the trial and claim that the judge was tipping the scale of justice for the defense.
You know, Paul, I saw that. And I want to make this clear to anyone out there, you know, legal Twitter or legal commentary. There is not a prosecutor on the planet, okay? Johnny Cochran mixed with McCoy from Law and Order couldn't win a case when you have a judge behaving in this particular way.
It had nothing to do with the judge's behavior. The prosecution's case was unwinnable because of the myriad of available video evidence showing that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense. And despite that evidence, here's the worst take of the day from former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance.
And the key point of the defense was arguing self-defense. As a former prosecutor, this strikes me as an odd situation for self-defense. It's something akin to saying that if you go into a bank and rob it and people are trying to apprehend you, you can then shoot your way out and claim self-defense. You know, that's a little bit of what Kyle Rittenhouse did. He created this problem and then he proceeded to threaten people to get out. Typically, you can't claim self-defense in a situation where you've provoked the incident.
Listen to what this woman's saying. When Joseph Rosenbaum threatened, gave chase, and then tried to grab Kyle Rittenhouse's rifle, it was Rittenhouse creating the problem. And when Rittenhouse used his weapon in self-defense, that was akin to bank robbery. Oh, my brain hurts. And on that ridiculous note, that's it for now. Please like, share, and be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. Thanks to Poofy for her help with this week's script. And thank you for tuning in. And as always, I hope to see you next time. If there is a next time.